All right, so we'll get started. We'll just take a couple of minutes just to kind of introduce today's topic. Just to start off, my name is Twani Montero. I'm one of the anti-racism ambassadors with Experiences Canada. And although we are all tuning in from different parts of Canada, I would like to acknowledge that I'm currently situated in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat Nation. I would also like to acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and that this territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. To find out what territory or treaty you are currently on, visit native-land.ca. And especially since it's Treaty Weeks this week in Ontario, I really encourage for those that live within the province of Ontario to find out more about the land you're on. In the wake of the pandemic earlier this summer, Experiences Canada offered their first series of online conversation, which was on reconciliation. And after the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, the reconciliation ambassadors really recommended that Experiences Canada do a second series focusing on anti-racism. So we are excited to continue Experiences Canada's Black Lives Matter / anti-racism online conversation series today with our webinar on Introduction to Anti-Racism. This series is being presented with the generous support of the RBC Foundation, and we are very grateful for the support and opportunity to encourage meaningful dialogue among youth across Canada. So check out in our chat box for a survey link. And it will also be sent out via email to those who registered for today's webinar. Today's webinar is the second in the series, and we'll be speaking about Introduction to Anti-Racism. So the speakers for today will discuss the history of racism and how anti-racism came to be, including key terms within the fields. We will also hear from a Black Indigenous speaker who will be speaking about how colonialism and Black histories are connected. And then we will finally hear from a representative of the Muslim Association of Canada who will speak about Islamophobia. Before we begin, I will briefly go over some Zoom features. We will be recording this session with it being available on our website with both closed captions and translation to French. To ask a question, please utilize the chat box by clicking on the bottom of your screen. Questions will be answered at the end of each speaker segment with our anti-racism ambassadors, Zoom moderators, collecting questions and passing them on to our hosts. If you experience any technical difficulties, please raise your hand or email Lizzie. So first up today, we have Mira Rahman, who is a fourth-year student at McGill University studying gender, sexuality, feminist, and social justice studies. She's passionate about amplifying silenced voices through her writing for magazines and journals in Montreal. Her revealing discussions about anti-racism with students at McGill have illuminated to her why it is so important to live our lives with anti-racism at the core of everyday practices. So thank you so much, Mira, for joining us today. We are excited to have you, and I look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you so much, Twani, for that introduction. I want to start off by saying how thankful I am to be here, and I am so excited to have a discussion with you all. So as Twani was saying in her introduction, the aim today is to give us all an introduction to racism and anti-racist education. So this is very important within the context of Canada, though a lot of people might not think that this is the case. Canada has a habit of convincing itself that the horrible things that came out of colonization don't exist here. But in reality, this country was founded on systemic racism, and this country was founded on stolen, colonized land. So racism is obviously present on multiple levels in Canada, and this is evident with staggering statistics. So Black and Indigenous people actually make up 40% of our federal prison population in Canada, while comprising less than 10% of the population. So to understand the racist treatment of racialized people in Canada, I think it's super important that we all get on the same page with the terminology that we'll be using throughout the next 6 weeks of this speaker series. To start off, so a lot of us have heard the term anti-racist, but what does that actually mean? And in order to understand anti-racism, we first have to define racism first. So racism is the combination of racial discrimination and power. So it occurs when people in a position of power or people who have a backing of systems of power discriminate against racialized people on the basis of race. So what's important to note here in the definition is the power part of this equation, because that is the part of the equation that is what distinguishes racism from discrimination. So for example, racialized people can discriminate against white people, but it's not racism because the power part of that equation is not present. So racism operates on multiple levels, and these levels actually work in tandem with one another to reinforce racist behaviors and ideas. So the levels that racism works on are on the individual level, the interpersonal level, the institutional level, and the systemic level. On the individual level, that means the beliefs and the attitudes and actions that individuals hold that perpetuate racism. So an example of this is an individual believing in the superiority of white people. Interpersonal racism occurs between individuals and, as the name suggests, between relationships. And this takes forms of public expressions of racism, often involving slurs, hateful speeches, and microaggressions. And now moving our lens out to a more broader view, institutional racism occurs within organizations. So these are discriminatory treatments, unfair policies, or biased practices based on race that result in inequitable outcomes for white people over racialized people. And these policies extend considerably beyond prejudice. These institutional policies actually sometimes never even mention any racial groups, but the intent is to create advantages for white people. And the last level that I'm going to talk about is the systemic level that racism operates on. So systemic racism is the overarching system of racial bias across institutions and society as a whole. So these systems give privileges to white people while resulting in disadvantages to racialized people. So when we think about all these levels that racism operates on and the people that are around us in our own lives, we tend to categorize people around us as racist or not racist. But really, it's not as simple as that. People shouldn't be categorized as racist or not racist, because the more accurate dichotomy here would be racist and anti-racist, because it's not enough to just be not racist. Being anti-racist, as opposed to just not racist, means making a conscious decision to make frequent, consistent, equitable choices daily that fight against racism. And the absence of this actually results in upholding aspects of white supremacy, even if this is unknown to a person. So the choice to be anti-racist is actually a daily decision. It's not something that we do once and we are labeled as anti-racist for the rest of our lives. We choose to be anti-racist every morning that we wake up. Therefore, we have to commit to learning continually about what that means, and if we want to dismantle racism on all levels, including ourselves. So for non-racialized people, being anti-racist means acknowledging and understanding your privilege. It also means to work to change your own internalized racism and interrupting and calling out racism when you see it. And for racialized people, being anti-racist means recognizing how race and racism has been internalized within you and whether that has been applied to other racialized groups. And being anti-racist on the individual and interpersonal level are obviously important, but it's only part of the work. To combat racism, we must also work to dismantle racist politics at the structural, systemic, and institutional levels. So this really illuminates the answer to the question of why anti-racist work in education is so important, because it exposes the large scale that racism is working within. It's not only in the day-to-day conversations that we have, but it's actually within our institutional processes that have direct links to unequal power, which work to produce a system that oppresses racialized people and privileges non-racialized people. So one of the actually earliest formulations of anti-racist education was formulated by two Canadian social science researchers, Carol Tater and Frances Henry. So these two researchers created a 9-step approach to anti-racist education, and I am more than happy to link their article to anyone who is interested. But I'll talk a little bit about their 9 points. So their 9 points to anti-racist education start at an individual and interpersonal level. They ask educators and students to really examine their own personal biases and behaviors and their relationships with others. And then as the elements go on, they move to more institutional and systemic level, calling for a reassessment of policies and procedures throughout schools to make sure that curriculums are reflective of all students' experiences. So because racism operates on these multiple levels, we have to make anti-racist choices on multiple levels. So as I said before, this includes the individual, interpersonal, institutional, and systemic levels. As I said before, being anti-racist is a daily commitment that must be carried out with intention. It's not easy work, it is very taxing, but it is necessary work. In How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Ibram Kendi, he writes, "We must believe in the possibility that we can strive to be anti-racist from this day forward. Believe in the possibility that we can transform our societies to be anti-racist from this day forward. Racist power is not godly, racist policies are not indestructible, racial inequities are not inevitable, racist ideas are not natural to the human mind." So I believe that through talks like these and through committed individuals, we can live in a much better world than we have today. We must work to change the minds of the people around us and the institutions together. And I can't wait to talk with you folks more about this and discuss about how this is actually occurring in Canada and within our schools. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.
And thank you so much, Mira. I feel like you did a wonderful job in explaining, these concepts in a way that was really easy to understand. And I just wanted to ask you a question that I think would be a great way for those that maybe are learning about anti-racism today. Um, what would you suggest for them to continue the conversation or learning, or maybe some direction for any readings or material that they should engage in?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because I think when people are wanting to be anti-racist or engage in these practices, they're like, okay, where do I start? It's an overwhelming thing to combat. And I think number one, going to talks like these is a way that you can start. I think definitely at the high school level, you shouldn't feel nervous to be acquainted with anti-racist material. I think that there are a bunch of resources, including YouTubers and online source material that's very accessible that high school students can use to learn about this material. I would suggest reading actually what I quoted, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Eden Krenge. It's a very accessible book, and it's very a great start to anti-racist practice because it really puts yourself in the position and he gives practical steps and how to be an anti-racist. So yeah, I really do want to stress that no one is too young to start interacting with this material and start interrogating the systems that are operating around them, including within your own schools.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask you another question from an audience member here, Sandy. She asks, Mira, if you've written any articles related to anti-racism during your studies, and if you'd be able to share maybe in the chat box with our audience members.
Yeah, so if I don't remember if it was said earlier, but I'm a student at McGill University studying gender studies. So I've written my fair share on anti-racism within my program, and I'd be more than happy to share my papers that I got a good mark on with all of you. So yeah, just please email me. I can put my email in the chat box, and I would be more than happy to share those resources with anybody who wants.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mira. We're going to move on to our second speaker in our series. So just stay with us in case we might have some more questions towards the end. So our second speaker I would like to introduce you all to is Andrea Williams. She is a proud Black Indigenous community educator working to highlight Indigenous ways of knowing and being within early learning frameworks. Her spirit name is Maingwin Kwe, and forgive me, Andrea, for the pronunciation. And she is from the Turtle Clan Ojibwe Nation. Andrea supports communities as they embark on a journey of anti-racism, learning, and allyship with the diverse nations of Indigenous peoples in Ontario, and uses her lived experience as a racialized woman and mother that informs her professional development in a way that invites non-Black and non-Black Indigenous people of color to think deeper and ask hard questions when it comes to anti-racism work. Andrea is also one of the regional recruitment coordinators for the Respect Study in Ontario, which is a research project that is offered in 8 languages. And they have a survey that's open to anyone who's experienced a pregnancy in Canada in the last 10 years. So thank you so much, Andrea, for joining us today. And we are so excited to have you here. Oh, Andrea, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Anine, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm first going to open with an introduction in Anishinaabemowin. This is just my way of introducing myself to creation and all my ancestors. So, Buju Ani Gakinawea, Andrea, Indigenous Cause, Manginkwe Indigo, Toronto Dunjibam, Yikinokandodem, Nikichinendam, Mayaya, Nikichinendam, Wabminigog, Ikinamaget Endao, Indapi Tendan, Makade, Anishinaabe. So I just said that my name's Andrea. Again, my spirit name is Wolfwoman, and I'm really happy to be here and be able to share some of my bodily felt knowledge and wisdom with you. And again, I am a proud Black Indigenous woman. I do have a bit of a social anxiety, and that's just a matter of self-care for me to openly name that. So please excuse any stumbling over words or long pauses. So my appointment on today's webinar is to discuss how colonialism and the history of Black Canadians are connected to racism, while also coming back to the main discussion on why it's important to be anti-racist. So what I wanted to share about my own work is that when I do a land acknowledgement, I also include the enduring presence of African communities and Black Indigenous people. And it's important to acknowledge the Black community when we speak to what is now called Canada, because when settlers trafficked enslaved Africans to these new lands, Black people were also connected by histories and realities of violence and genocide that was faced by the Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island. And we also have to acknowledge that when enslaved peoples were ripped from their lands and trafficked here, they had to find a way to transport their culture, one that they were not allowed to have access to or able to perform, otherwise they'd be subjected to extreme levels of violence. But they had to find a way to transform their culture into a new one and survive on this strange new soil. And it was in that indigenization and through the dynamic replanting of their roots that Black people became Indigenous to these new lands. So when we uncover and begin to uncover Canada's history of colonization and expose its involvement in the slave trade, which, you know, still today, not a lot of people know Canada was involved in the slave trade, but when we begin to uncover that history, we are better guided in our anti-racism work. And then we can be better suited to be helpful allies to Afro-diasporic and Black people. And again, anti-racism is not just work. It's an ongoing commitment to learning and a call to challenge all those uncomfortable truths and the biases that you may hold on to, about others, and the society that we share. So the more we learn about Canada's history of anti-Black racism, the further we move away from the rhetoric of Canadian multiculturalism, because we really need to start being more critical of those platitudes that Canada is not as bad as the States. So much of what Black people know from lived experience, from bodily felt knowledge, from our inherent ways of knowing and being, from our seeing and storytelling, isn't recognized as credible in white-dominated research spaces, in literature, or our educational institutions, which are inherently colonial. So when we seek validation on what we're experiencing with anti-Black racism within these systems, we're often met with a lot of pushback, doubt, and disagreement. And there's a Canadian proclivity to ignore our collective past, although we can't really speak to anti-racism without shining a light on that history of Black Canadians and colonialism. So acknowledging Canada's ties to the slave trade and its continued violence and oppression towards Black and Afro-diasporic peoples, including the ongoing erasure of Black Indigenous people, that needs to be at the core of our anti-racism work. Matthew Wove participated in the Anti-Racism and ECE webinar, and he said that so much history is taught in an episodic fashion, and then it's then viewed as something of the past. And our curricula needs to make more clear links between historical policies and acts of colonization and oppression and how it still shows up today. And he gave an example about the housing policies in the early mid-20th century, which still plays out today. So those concrete connections need to be made. So what I wanted to, highlight were some of those histories and how we're still seeing that today. When we talk about the enslaved Africans, they were trafficked to Canada before the American Revolution and sold into slavery. And many enslaved Africans were also owned or sheltered by Indigenous nations. Charmaine Nelson's work, Unmasking Slavery in Canada, uncovers slave trade and colonial trade routes from 1850, where the links showing slaves were sent to Nova Scotia and Quebec were strategically removed from maps. In 1775, we've got the Black loyalist who served on the loyalist side and fled to Nova Scotia during the American Revolution because of Canada's promise for freedom. We have evidence of systemic and environmental racism faced by the Black community of Africville in 1848. We have the Black Farmers Oklahoma travel ban in 1911. And the last segregated Black school in Ontario closed in 1965 in Essex County, while the last segregated school in Canada closed in 1983. So we can clearly see, and that's just, that's just, the minimum of what Canada's done, but we can see Canada's anti-Black racism overtly, covertly, and systemically in these shamefully outdated laws and inimical policies and regulations of our society. So all of that contributes to the deeply embedded anti-Black racism that we see in Canada today, which is an inability to recognize the humanity of Black people. And when we see that inhumanity played out today, it looks like, some firm examples are when a teacher thought it was appropriate to call CAS on a Black parent for packing Jamaican food in their child's lunch. It's why police handcuffed a 6-year-old Black girl in Mississauga this year. It's why Ottawa University professors have petitioned for the right to freely use the N-word in class lectures. It's why we see nooses being hung in Toronto construction sites with no arrests made. And while we are connected by these histories and harsh realities of oppression and colonialism and trauma, we're also connected by the enduring resilience, ethos, and strength of the community, because we're still here. African people and Black Indigenous people are still here. So we need to start to think about those long-term strategies for the urgency and necessary sustainability of this work. And Larissa Crawford says we need to think of anti-racism work as restorative practice. Believe Black people, make space for Black voices, and acknowledge and confront the anti-Blackness that exists within ourselves and within our communities. And as Canadians, settlers, diasporic, and Indigenous peoples, we have a cultural, a personal, and intellectual commitment to understanding this country's legacy and what role we each play in shaping our shared future. So to paraphrase Alyssa Tigeter, you can love this land that you occupy, but still be critical of the institutions that shape how all of the folks who share it are treated. And that's all I have for today. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I feel like, I've just given how you were able to just so eloquently capture the whole history within a brief, 10 minutes. I think that was very, eye-opening, especially to hear what sticks out to me, the last segregated school in Ontario to close in the 80s. That's not, that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
And what, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was agreeing.
So one of the questions that I have, for you is, given your experience as a community educator, would be what would be some tips or tools that you would recommend, to other educators that maybe are listening in today on how they can start having these conversations about anti-racism or injecting it into their curriculum, given the fact that it's not something that, personally that I've been exposed to in my own education system here in Ontario.
So how educators can start speaking to anti-racism work is really just listening to Black people. I mean, all of the research is out there as well, right? So asking Black people to do more emotional labor, we really need to think about that as well. But the anecdotes, the research, the findings, the studies, they're all out there. And a lot of us are using social media too. So really going through your feed, and if you're not learning anything new, or if the people on your feed continue to look just like you, that needs to change. But, there's a plethora of information that's easily accessible, but making space for Black voices to be heard is a great start.
Thank you for your response. And I have another question for you. So some believe that starting anti-racism conversations are best suited for high school aged youth. Would you agree with that? And maybe share what age would you start having anti-racism conversations with children?
So we need to start talking about race thoughtfully and deliberately, and especially for our children, we need to make it relatable for them, and starting as young as possible is always best, and I'll get to that reasoning. But making it relatable, like how would you feel if, or how do you think so and so feels when? Talk about social inequities, curate diverse visuals and reading material. And it doesn't really matter what the reading level, because you can always adjust vocally edit it for children's comprehension level, but offer opportunities to challenge beliefs, because we know that racism permeates our culture and it creates problems that we can't just talk around. We need to actively work against them. And studies show that as early as 2, children start to define people based on race. And again, I'm going to quote Ibram Kendi, How to Be Anti-Racist. I'll bring a personal experience, because there's so much, power in bodily felt knowledge. But as a parent of a racialized child, I see the way, and my son's only 2, I see the way other children exclude or divert from him during play. Right. So we really need to start having these conversations early on. And we know that by 2, children are already using race to start reasoning about people and making decisions on how to choose playmates. And that was found in a study in 1997, Katz and Kofkin study. So if you're not challenging those beliefs and if you're avoiding those discussions, it actually reinforces racism by allowing children to start drawing their own conclusions about people. And we are our children's first teacher, right? So if you aren't actively anti-racist, you're not modeling the compassion, the self-reflection, or the social skills that guide our next generation. Yeah.
And thank you for your answer. I feel like it's so powerful and eye-opening for the fact that as parents or educators, we really have that ability to mold and incorporate anti-racism very early on into a child's education or development. So thank you so much, Andrea. I'm so excited to have you here. And please stay with us, because there might be more questions that come up towards the end. So if anyone else has any other questions, please utilize the Q&A chat box, and we will try and get through them. So now I will introduce our third speaker, Ms. Nyamo Ali. So Ms. Nyamo Ali is a powerhouse and inspirational leader working as an educator for both adults and children for almost 20 years, and currently serves as a principal at Abar Secondary School. She was nominated for the 2017 Governor General Awards for her outstanding leadership. Ms. Ali is also recognized for her community advocacy in addressing anti-Black and systemic racism, and friends of Nyamo say she is a force to be reckoned with. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I really look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you so much, though, for those kind words. Thank you. First of all, I would like to start thanking Experience Canada for allowing us this platform to really share ideas and have a discussion. I also want to thank the previous 2 speakers, Andrea and Mira. Learned a lot from your discussion, and I'm honored to be sharing a platform with you. Before I highlight some of the topic that I was asked to discuss and share experience, first I wanted to mention that I came to this platform through the Muslim Association of Canada. And those of you who do not know, Muslim Association of Canada serves Muslim community in Canada from East Coast to West Coast. we have 10 full-time schools, community centers, youth centers, as well as full-time and part-time schools. So some of the experiences that I will be sharing is through our full-time schools, and some of the issues and challenges that we have witnessed our Muslim youth goes through, particularly for the Muslim youth, Muslim Black youth. So when you hear the word of Islamophobia, there's so many definitions that come to mind. But for me, as an educator, what comes to mind is all the lived experience of our Muslim youth. For example, last year, some of the incidents that happened in our school, of our secondary school, was a teacher who her hijab has been pulled off while she was coming to her morning shift to teach classes. We had 2 other incidents that we filed, which was students who have been grabbed while they were getting off the bus to attend school, and those are middle school children, grade 7 and 8. So basically, when you look at Islamophobia or the fear of Muslims, of course, we know that it's, ignorance and maybe media propaganda, or maybe prejudice, or maybe fear of Islam and Muslims. So basically, some of the stories that we see every day is that students who are being threatened, students who, when they're taking the bus, have to look at their shoulders to afraid who's taking the bus with them, because the experience of being yelled at as a terrorist or go back to your country is very common. And also that we're seeing that the justice system and how Black youth, and especially Muslim Black youth, is being profiled. So as you can imagine, even now in the 21st century, this year, schools started with a coronavirus, a lot of challenges that are going on with, all of students and children, wearing masks and health issues and coronavirus issues, but yet we have this pressure of extra layer of Muslim youth. When you look at the media, when you look at what's going on in Quebec, and Muslim women's hijab being politicized, when you look at what's going on in France, when you look what's going on across the border in America. So basically, Islamophobia and fear of Muslims is something that affects every day for our Muslim youth. And this is a pressure that we are seeing more and more as radicalized and fear and hate groups arise. According to Statistic Canada, for 2017, numbers were almost 150% for increase of hate groups. So as an educator, it is a great worry, and we know that these microaggressions and pressures, how it would affect the health of our youth who are already going through a difficult time, especially during a health crisis and coronavirus. So especially for Muslim Black youth, that the challenges are how do you say, they're dealing with multiple identities. And one thing that's coming to my mind as I just say the statement of Muslim Black youth is my daughter's experience, who just graduated in Ottawa University. And we're always having this conversation of her own university and the professors, as being mentioned now, the discussion of the N-word, and also that our Muslim youth trying to navigate that, to be proud of who they are, whether they're struggling to find a place to pray, whether they're struggling to focus in their academic, and people are putting pressure on, calling them, go back to your country, or you're terrorist and this and that. So those are usually general experiences that we share. However, for me as an educator, when I look at what's going on, we can only, I think it's some of the ways that we can categorize is that there's an attitudinal Islamophobia and there's a systematic Islamophobia. Attitudinal Islamophobia basically affects the lives of its people's minds and hearts, right? And Muslims are, if the population is seeing that Muslims are racist, or Muslims are extremist, or Muslims are, this or that. All this is stereotypical. How do we tackle that? So generally, there's a lot of initiatives going on in the Muslim community, and then you will see that Islamic Awareness Week, that you will see that Muslim summer festivals, you will see that interfaith groups and discussions, just to appeal that people to change their attitudes about Islam and Muslims, and just to reiterate the amount of energy that it takes. Listen, we're not a violent religion. I just want to practice my faith. I'm not here to convert anybody. I'm not here to, commit any crime. I just want to be me, same as everyone else. So it is exhausting. And some of the Islamic Awareness Week that I attended, that you could see university the students, different topics that are preparing. Okay, we're going to talk about hijab. People have issues about why Muslim women cover. Do they really being forced to cover? So it is this burden over and over and over to justify for who you are, to justify, listen, hijab is my choice, to justify that prayer is part of my life. For me, this is my meditation. If you want to call it yoga, if you want to call it spiritual, but for me, it's a prayer, and it is part of me that I have to pray 5 times a day. So those basic things that as Muslims and Muslim youth and Muslim Black youth are part of their belief and part of their identity is becoming a struggle in a school system. And it's causing a lot of anxiety, and it's causing a lot of stress, and it is a microaggression to our youth. So, and unfortunately that even though Muslim community tried, it is mainly, I would say, even our fault as a Muslim community. We focus to change the attitude, the Islamophobia attitude, and to just always justify why you are who you are, basically. Why do you wear hijab? Why do you have to pray? Why this, why that? But I think that it is time that we should shift the conversation to the bigger picture, which is dealing with the systematic Islamophobia and dealing with policies and practices that being established to really perpetrate and continue in the hate of Muslims. And we see now that I was one of the people who was involved and co-founder of Justice for Abdurrahman. Those of you who heard, which is the young man who was mentally ill, Muslim, Black, mentally ill, multiple identities, but has been killed in front of us in a broad daylight. And now 4 years later, fighting for his justice, now that the officer who basically was not charged, and now he's free to go back to his work. So this is a never-ending battle. But I am hopeful that not only the conversations like this, but also that many people who stood up, like United Church Parkdale, who was in the area where Abdurrahman Abdi died, Huntingburg community, and a lot of mental health organizations who see the impact of Islamophobia and hate and discrimination on our youth, and especially on Black youth, who are standing up, are slowly changing with these policies. So I would really echo that as educators, we need to look at systematically the policies that are in place, practices that are in place, institutions that are in place. How can we remove these barriers who are victimizing our youth, who are discriminating our youth? They, as you know, youth already has enough to deal with. As being young and living in 21st century with coronavirus, there's already enough pressure to deal with. So those are the few points that I wanted to add, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
And thank you so much. I really appreciate you bringing in that perspective of that intersectionality of identity, right? About being Black, being Muslim, and how that can kind of clash, especially if it's immigrant, first generation, youth that are dealing with a multitude of things. And one question I would like to ask you, Ms. Ali, given your personal and professional experience, what would you say would be some of the biggest challenges facing Black Muslim youth in Canada today, and what could be done to address those challenges?
I think some of those experiences that I mentioned is challenges, and we know that the challenges of the Muslim Black young men is different than Muslim Black young women. For example, that the challenge for a young women or girls is that if they look visibly Muslim, there is the attack of hijab, and especially now us living in Ottawa, crossing the border and going to Gatineau is basically 5-10 minutes. We had girls who went to the beach for graduation. It was just few months ago, basically in June, around June, July. And as they were leaving and getting in their car, somebody assaulted them and, pulled their scarf. And this is very common, and it's terrorizing and violating women's rights. I feel that women's clothing, whether you wear too much or too little, it's being politicized. And it is important to go back to the human right aspect of women has the right to wear. They have the freedom to wear or not to wear what they want. And it is sad to say that a province in Canada today has legislations that we are fighting, that Muslim girls are not allowed to wear a scarf. So I think for Muslim Black young women or girls, those are the challenge when they are in non-Muslim environments. When they are in Muslim environment, the challenge is that Muslim community is very diverse, and usually majority of people who run maybe community centers and masjids are from either Arab or Pakistani background. So Black youth, both girls and boys, don't feel home, don't feel fit in. And especially it depends if those cultures have colonizers mentality, and if there was a slavery on those countries. And even though you're Muslim, even though you're wearing a headscarf, or maybe you are a Muslim, a young Black man, and you've been profiled with police officers, and you have the fear, and now you run to the Muslim community and come to the masjid, and then yet you don't feel fit in. So we are noticing that, a challenge of a tug war at two different worlds that they don't fit in. The Muslim community that they feel sometimes they don't fit in 100%, and non-Muslim communities that they feel they've been targeted. My son, who's 25, when he takes my car or any nice car outside, without him doing anything, he automatically assumes that he's being followed. And we know what happened to George Floyd. We know what happened to Abdurrahman Abdi. So those images are very horrific. And Muslim Black youth it's the fear of just looking at your folders with no fault of yours. And I think that's huge pressure. So educators can do a lot by, for example, having the conversations that we're having, allowing Muslim youth a platform that not only they can come and feel safe to sit down and have a conversation, but also to express their challenges and what they're going through. And it is our responsibility to remove the systematic racism that are built in our employment, education, and all the other institutions.
And thank you so much for highlighting that, because I think it's so important to kind of have that understanding that there's so much differences in intersectionality of identity, especially given the examples that you've given, Ms. Ali. So thank you so much. I'm just going to take a quick look here in the chat box. I have one question. Maybe we can quickly go with all the speakers, Mira or Andrea, if you feel called to answer. So the question's from anonymous attendee. If you have a personal mantra that you say to yourself or to your children or students to help them understand racism better, or if not, what do you wish someone told you about racism growing up?
I'll just start. I was really thinking the question that was asked earlier, which age do you start having the conversation? Both of my sons are born in Canada. Older one was born in Toronto and the younger one in Ottawa. And the older one, I started with the conversation back in his teens, but today's society is different. The younger one, I started having the conversation when he was actually 8 years old, because I noticed that he has being discriminated against, and for him to go through that, I had to have the conversation. Of course, we have to do it to the level of the child. I think that what we're noticing is that Black youth or Muslim youth, it's the story of the villain, who to be scared of. So it is important to have the conversation and equip our kids with heroes in their lives. Not only that, the colonizers' history and the curriculum that's being established, but also to tell the heroes in their lives, whether it's African heroes or Muslim mathematicians or Muslim scientists. It is important to tell stories and empower youth to people that they can relate to, and they can really follow the footsteps of those people. So I think in any age, it is important to have the conversation, even though that conversation would be different whether it's a middle school, high school, or university.
Thank you so much. And I also quickly wanted to give the opportunity if Mira or Andrea wanted to say any closing or add any additional comments.
I know we're kind of short on time, but I just wanted to offer that, it's not a matter of if, it's really a matter of when. A lot of racialized folk, Black, for myself as a Black woman, visually identified as a Black woman, that experience with racism is inevitable. So knowing that my children are also racially distinct, it's, not a matter of if, it's when. So really speaking to my children and letting them know that they're loved, letting them know that their skin is beautiful, letting them know that they have a strong community supporting them, letting them see really positive role models, and exposing them to, again, the visuals and the literacy, so that they can see those positive reflections of themselves in the bodies of the people around them is really important. And knowing that their home is a safe space, and knowing that I'm a safe space for them too, because again, it's not if, it's when. And again, I'm already seeing it at 2, right? So what does that do to a young person, a little person, when they can see that there are people pulling away from them, or there are characteristics attached to him that aren't his. So those experiences with racism start really early. So, really preparing our children to walk this world, but also prepare them with that armor of love and self-respect and self-esteem, but also that community armor, knowing that they have the support of their loved ones and their family and their kin right behind them, and seeing really good, strong reflections of themselves in the people around them. And that really helps. It helps, but we were still going to be experiencing racism no matter what.
Thank you. And Mira, do you have any quick final thoughts?
Yeah, that was so amazing. I loved hearing both of you speak. And I'll just finish off with saying a mantra that I like to tell myself, that nobody is born racist, it's learned. So actively approaching each day by unlearning racist practices in our own lives, and hopefully the lives of people around us.
And thank you so much. So just for the closing, I wanted to thank Mira, Andrea, Niamo, Ali for joining us today. I'm definitely leaving this conversation inspired and motivated to continue learning more about anti-racism. And to quickly recap, we heard from Mira about what anti-racism is and why it's important to actively work towards, especially as new studies conceptualize what Black, Indigenous, people of color are experiencing daily. We also heard from Andrea, who reminded us how colonialism and Black histories are connected, and that being anti-racist is being anti-Black racist and anti-Indigenous racist. And lastly, Nyamo Ali from the Muslim Association of Canada explained what Islamophobia is and how it's connected to the topic of racism. And I just wanted to quickly shout out to our sponsor, the RBC Foundation. We are very grateful for their support in giving us this wonderful opportunity to encourage meaningful dialogue on anti-racism among Canadian youth. We also have a survey. So if you're able to take the time to just share us your thoughts and answer the questions, that would be greatly appreciated. For youth listening in today, check out our online conversation Facebook group and the Experiences Canada website for some more resources and activities. The links to both will be in the chat shortly. And as well, I'm so sorry we weren't able to get to all the questions in the chat box. Feel free to join again our Facebook online conversation series group to answer them, to ask them there. And given what we've discussed and learned today, we do have a weekly challenge and activity for youth this week. So the challenge is to share a news headline, article, or even a picture of a school book page and rewrite it from an anti-racist perspective. If you can make sure to share your thoughts on social media and use the hashtag Experiences Canada Anti-Racism and Anti-Racism Conversation, we will share that on our social media page. And with that, thank you all for joining us today. Make sure to follow us on social media at Experiences Canada for more information on Black Lives Matter and its impact in Canada. And don't forget to join us next week for our Justice and Security webinar. All right, thank you so much, everyone.